I think I was just always into it, man. I always been around it. It was just something I was drawn to. Anytime that there was like fight scenes or any combative things on TV, it always, drew my attention. So I always wanted to dive into that, especially watching like the old, kung fu movies on Saturdays with my uncles. And it was always dope. I was always into that, and ever since then, growing up, I was into all combative stuff, watching the old movies like Bloodsport, Enter the Dragon, even stuff like Power Rangers, man. Like anything that dealt with any fight choreography, any fighting or combatives, I was always drawn to it. It was something that I just liked to do, something that I was around a lot. I was exposed to that when I was young. My first teacher, I would say my family, mom, dad, my uncles, my grandmother. Me being around them and growing up in a Bronx apartment, it just right then and there, it was a different type of tone set. You had to have thick skin. You had to have that tough exterior. I learned from them how to deal with things physically, spiritually, mentally. Everybody brought different solutions to problems, and I just learned from each. So me just analyzing that, growing up, I learned all of that. Like humility was the number one thing that my family taught me. So what lie do most beginners believe about martial arts? They think they're gonna catch bullets with their teeth, it's a whole different world out there, just be ready to learn and go through the ups and downs. It's the obstacles of life. The misconception is like when you watch these old movies and stuff, and when you learn and you get from step 1 to step 2 and you level up, don't think you can't be touched. This is real world and real life situations. So, I believe the lie that most beginners think is that they'll be untouchable. Like they could beat everybody. And that's not the case. Martial arts for me was always a way of life. The way you view things, the way you approach things, it's all about choices and decisions you make. Adapt and adjust. There's certain things that you plan for might not go your way. Do you got the intelligence and the awareness to, flip it or adapt in moments time and do what you got to do? And life is that same way. There's things that you plan for. Sometimes you have to roll with the punches, and that's the difference between a regular fighter and a great fighter. Knowing how to adapt and adjust in moments time. That question have different layers, depending on who you are, depending on how you grew up, your environment. And studying the arts will be more about fighting versus a different area you're growing up. It will be more about the arts. So it is, to me, I feel like it all depends how you're growing up or what you want to be seen as. Like me, being a martial artist, I know martial comes first and the arts is second. So obviously it's going to be more fighting involved than the actual, art. Martial arts is unpredictable. You really can't define it and say like martial got 70% and then the arts avoiding it is 30%. It all depends what situation you're in. If you completely can't avoid it, like somebody is impeding your way of exit, or somebody, actively is, putting hands on your loved ones, and by all means, you got to do what you got to do. You can't really avoid that. You're going to have to step in, handle your business. And there's situations where you got to be aware of your surroundings. These days now, there's cameras everywhere. There's people recording. And it's like, you may be doing something with good intent. The media and everybody else could flip it and make it seem that you're the villain now. With martial arts, though, is a balance. If you could avoid it, that's great. But if you have to do what you got to do and throw down, just make sure you neutralize the threat. Some people don't understand fighting is ugly. Fighting is very violent, especially in a real world situation. You may never know who you're going to go across. In the streets, you can't pick your opponent. So there's going to be a size disparity. It might be a skill set disparity. Your awareness might be low. Listen, you might be getting the best of the person and then they peoples jump in. Learning in the dojo is very imperative to make sure you pressure test everything. You're going through lots of resistance and real life scenario based situations because it's so many different factors and components you can't calculate. You just don't know. Don't think that the person is going to be that compliant the way they are in your dojo. that they're going to be in the street just doing that, letting you just do whatever you want. Now, with the influx of so many different type of styles and fighters now, everybody know how to fight some way, shape, or form. So now you really got to be on your P's and Q's, have your IQ and your awareness up and make sure your skill set, you're ready to go. I always feel like stay relaxed and stay ready. You can see everything. You get too angry, you might get tunnel vision and miss something. It's about time, space, and opportunity. There's a lot of times I use my martial arts. I'm not a real good storyteller, so it's just, things that I've learned along the way, things what to do and not to do. And depending on what school you go to, they can prepare you for combat outside the dojo. There's always a situation with the instructors, a teacher that could teach great, phenomenal teacher, but really can't fight, really can't apply those to real life combat. Then you got teachers that could throw down, definitely could throw down, could fight, but can't teach at all. Like can't bring that curriculum into a structured setting so it could teach everybody else to be on, the teacher's level. And then you have the rare ones where you have both of them. And those are the ones you're going to try to seek. And you could tell if it's BS or not. It shouldn't take 50,000 moves to get to something like to neutralize a threat. These days you got to be quick. You have to be quick. You got to be responsive. You don't want to be too proactive because then you'll be the aggressor. You don't want to be too proactive because then you'll be the aggressor. But you got to understand that, if if something happens, you just got to make sure that your reaction time is right there. So once again, timing, space, and opportunity are those three things that I try to, hone in on when it comes to fighting, because there's going to be people with speed, man, with power, and to take those and to even that up, to even like weaken that, to even go against something like that, amazing speed, amazing power, your timing, your spacing, and then when the opportunity presents itself, take full advantage of that opportunity to neutralize the threat. There was no moment that I wanted to quit martial arts. Just like anything you like in life, everything is good in moderation, but I never wanted to quit, never wanted to stop. I mean, I know that I've been around people who had experiences that they quit because, sometimes instructors was all about money, never really wanted to teach. Some instructors never recognized the person's potential or talent. I always wanted to stay in a state of elevation. So quitting was never a part of the plan. I have the desire for the arts, whether it be martial arts, dance, fitness, anything that deals with creation or innovation, I'm always down for that. Me being a correction officer, I pretty much seen it all. Smallest of the smallest, beat down the biggest person in the jail. When it comes to that, you want to avoid conflict as much as possible, because there's always going to be a chance where, you could get hurt, obviously. But for a martial artist, it's a battle wound. It's a scar. It's for a warrior. That's something that you kind of look forward to. That's what you're in it for. You're gonna get hit. You're gonna get punched in the mouth. How can you take a punch? You're gonna flop. You're gonna get back and do what you got to do. Stay professional at all times. That's the number one thing. You can't let words dictate how you're going to move and navigate throughout the day. So if you've been in the arts for years, you're going to develop that, professionalism, that discipline, that honor code. There's certain things you're going to go by, before you actually take action. But when you take action, just make sure you go all the way with it. You got to neutralize the threat, because once you make an example and let the person know that I ain't really don't want to be playing with it like that, B. Like, just chill out. Once that's already established and set, that start going around, and then people start knowing. I mean, you're never going to be the toughest guy in the room all the time. There's always a situation where you could get beat, and that's just life. And you got to be willing to accept that. You're going to get clipped. You're going to get stabbed. You're going to get punched in your mouth. You might get slammed. You know what I'm saying? It might be one of the days that you're off. You're off your game. And now what you gonna do? You know, me, I like to stay humble, man. I like to chill out. If a situation arises where I gotta handle business, then I handle business, you know. It is what it is. Cam, don't sue me. I try to stay on the humility but courageous side. Ego and fear is something that's spoken in the Bible as well. You know, you want to try to keep that ego in check at all times and stay humble, you know, and then the only fear you should have is fear the Lord. First thing you try to control in real confrontation, I would say the mind. The mind is very powerful. Without the mind, everything else is null and void. I would say mind first, and then it's the breath control, and then it's the body.